The human brain is one of the most complex and fascinating organs in the body. It is responsible for everything from our thoughts and emotions to our movement and bodily functions. But how does the brain actually work? What are the basics of brain function? At its most basic level, the brain is made up of billions of nerve cells called neurons. These neurons communicate with each other through electrical and chemical signals. When a neuron fires, an electrical signal is sent down the axon, which then releases chemicals called neurotransmitters into the synapse, the small gap between neurons. The neurotransmitters then bind to receptors on the receiving neuron, which can either excite or inhibit the neuron from firing. This communication between neurons allows for all of our bodily functions, including movement. It also allows for our thoughts and emotions. Different regions of the brain are responsible for different functions, such as the frontal lobe, which is responsible for decision-making and problem-solving, and the hippocampus, which is important for memory formation. Through a process called neuroplasticity, the brain can also change and adapt based on our experiences and behaviors, which allows us to learn and grow. Exercise, a healthy diet, and getting enough sleep are all important for maintaining a healthy brain. Practices like meditation and mindfulness can also be helpful for improving brain function and reducing stress. So, while the brain may seem complex, understanding the basics of brain function can help us take care of this vital organ and lead healthier, happier lives. The nervous system is divided into two main parts: the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system consists of the brain and spinal cord, while the peripheral nervous system consists of all the nerves that extend from the central nervous system to the rest of the body. When we experience pain, for example, the sensory neurons in our skin send signals to the spinal cord, which then sends signals to the brain for processing. Neurons are the basic building blocks of the nervous system. They are specialized cells that transmit electrical and chemical signals throughout the body. When a neuron receives a signal, it sends an electrical impulse down its axon, which releases chemical messengers called neurotransmitters into the synapse, the small gap between neurons. The neurotransmitters then bind to receptors on the receiving neuron, which can either excite or inhibit the neuron from firing. This communication between neurons allows for all of our bodily functions, including movement. Sensory perception is the process by which we interpret and understand the world around us through our senses. From the smell of a flower to the taste of food, our senses allow us to experience and interact with our environment. At the heart of sensory perception is the brain, which is responsible for receiving, processing, and interpreting sensory information. When we smell a flower, for example, the odor molecules bind to receptors in the olfactory neurons in our nose. These neurons then send signals to the olfactory bulb in the brain, which processes the information and sends it to the primary olfactory cortex for further processing. Similarly, when we taste food, the taste receptors in our mouth send signals to the gustatory cortex in the brain, which processes the information and allows us to recognize the flavor. Our sense of touch, on the other hand, is processed by different parts of the brain, depending on the type of touch. Light touch, for example, is processed by the somatosensory cortex, while pain is processed by the anterior cingulate cortex. Our sense of sight, which is arguably our most important sense, is also processed by different regions of the brain. The visual information from our eyes is first processed by the thalamus before being sent to the primary visual cortex in the occipital lobe. The visual cortex then processes the information and allows us to perceive the shape, color, and texture of the object we are looking at. Finally, our sense of hearing is also processed by different parts of the brain. Sound waves are detected by the hair cells in the inner ear, which then send signals to the auditory nerve. The auditory nerve then sends signals to the primary auditory cortex in the temporal lobe, which processes the information and allows us to perceive the sound. The brain is an incredibly complex organ, with different regions responsible for different functions. Sensory perception is just one of the many functions that the brain is capable of. The motor system is comprised of several areas of the brain that work together to plan, execute, and monitor movements. When we type, for example, the brain must first plan the movements needed to press each key. This planning is carried out by the motor cortex, which is located in the frontal lobe of the brain. Once the movements have been planned, the motor cortex sends signals to the appropriate muscles to execute the movement. These signals travel down the spinal cord, which acts as a conduit for the signals between the brain and the muscles. As we walk or run, for example, the motor cortex sends signals to the muscles in our legs, coordinating the movements needed to keep us balanced and moving forward. The cerebellum, located at the back of the brain, is responsible for monitoring and fine-tuning movements. When we play a video game, for example, the cerebellum is constantly monitoring our movements and making adjustments to ensure that we are moving in the right direction and at the right speed. The basal ganglia, located deep within the brain, are responsible for initiating and modulating movements. When we play a musical instrument, for example, the basal ganglia are involved in the initiation of each note and the modulation of our movements to create the desired sound. The brain is responsible for monitoring and regulating a wide range of physiological processes, from temperature regulation to hunger and thirst. When our body temperature rises, for example, the brain initiates the process of sweating to cool us down. The hypothalamus, located deep within the brain, plays a crucial role in maintaining homeostasis by regulating a wide range of physiological processes. When we eat, for example, the hypothalamus sends signals to the digestive system to initiate the process of digestion and absorption of nutrients. The pituitary gland, located at the base of the brain, is also involved in regulating homeostasis by producing and releasing hormones that control various physiological processes. The brain also regulates our sleep-wake cycle to ensure that we get enough restorative sleep. The brainstem, located at the base of the brain, plays a crucial role in regulating breathing, heart rate, and blood pressure, among other vital functions. When we exercise, for example, the brainstem increases our breathing rate to ensure that we get enough oxygen to our muscles. The brain's ability to maintain homeostasis is essential for our survival and overall health. Memory is a complex process that involves several areas of the brain, including the hippocampus, amygdala, and prefrontal cortex. When we learn new information, the brain's hippocampus plays a crucial role in encoding and consolidating that information into long-term memory. The hippocampus is located in the medial temporal lobe of the brain and is essential for the formation and retrieval of memories. When we recall a past event, the hippocampus retrieves the memory from long-term storage and sends it to the prefrontal cortex for further processing. The prefrontal cortex, located at the front of the brain, is responsible for working memory and the manipulation of stored information. When we take a test, for example, the prefrontal cortex retrieves the relevant information from long-term memory and uses it to answer the questions. The amygdala, located in the temporal lobe of the brain, is involved in the formation and storage of emotional memories. When we experience a strong emotion, such as fear or happiness, the amygdala plays a crucial role in encoding and consolidating that emotional experience into long-term memory. Memory is a complex process that involves multiple areas of the brain and is still not fully understood by scientists. But by understanding how the brain processes and stores memories, we can better appreciate the role that memory plays in our daily lives.